You've just stepped into the undercurrent, where silence speaks, and the dead have stories, where trials twist, lies tangle, and justice waits in the dark. This is 12 Gauge, bent, not just reporting, relentless pursuit.
Homicide files, chalk lines fade, but the pain still breathes in the scars they made. Names on a flyer, tears on a post. We speak for the voices that need it the most. From alleyway blood to courtroom lies, we break it down raw, no suit, no disguise. Autopsy ink and ballistic threads. Each theory we chase, every word they said. Crime don't sleep, and neither do we. Mic to the ground where the truth runs free. Learn, 12 Gauge locked on the case, tracking the truth, no time to waste. From cold-blooded murder to trials on the stand, we dig through the dark with a mic in hand. Missing souls, addiction scars, forensics lit under justice stars. You want real? We speak that flame. Awareness, theory, remember the name. 12 Gauge, we aim with truth. Late night reports, body cam rolls, whispers in courtroom, shattered parole, patterns in blood, a trace on the blade, every unsolved tale, yeah, we invade. The addicts.
All right, all right, all right. Happy Tuesday evening, everybody. For me here in Texas, it's nighttime. It's 10:20 Central Time. I don't know where you're at, but wherever you are, I hope life is treating you good and you're getting the most out of it that you possibly can. And if you're not, then what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Hello to my wonderful subs in the chat. Thank you so much for being here. You know, tonight I wanted to talk about addiction and to discuss a little bit about sobriety as well. Because, you know, many times individuals that are trapped in the addictive process, they don't really know how to cut ties with the most basic thing to overcome this illness. And that thing is the thought process. The thought process to be able to start thinking differently, to be able to cognitively be aware of your surroundings and what your triggers could be. And all that is therapy talk. If you don't understand anything that I'm talking about, if you've ever been to therapy, then you understand what I'm talking about. Well, first, I want to talk about the thought process. You know, when we're born, we face a lot of obstacles growing up. Some of us are coming from single parent homes, some of us are coming from no parent homes. We're raised with grandparents, some of us are raised with no parents. Some of us are raised within the system. And you know that programs you and it programs your thought process based on your exterior stimuli, whatever that might be. If it's positive, then chances are that you're going to look at the world a little different. If it's negative, chances are your glass is always going to be half empty, never half full. Because when your glass is half full, you look at what you can do to add to that glass to make it run off over. Instead of just looking at it as, what do I need to do to make this glass from emptying at the spot where I'm at? And I hope this is making sense because it takes a long time to get people to understand this. It takes a lot of classes, a lot of dedication, and a lot of ability to be patient with individuals who slip and fall. Addiction is a slippery slope. If you don't work at it every day, just like a weight losing program or something like that, then eventually you're going to slide backwards. You know, for many of us, good food is the enemy. I love to eat, just like I know a lot of you in the chat love to eat. And whenever that happens, if you're stationary for very long, you're going to pack on the weight. And as I'm talking about this, I want you to know that your thought process starts very early in your recovery process. You start off understanding exactly where your thought process goes wrong. And as I've talked before, you have the activating event, you have your feelings, because everybody in this room, including myself, we feel every moment of the day. Whether we identify with our feelings or whether we react to our feelings, we do feel. And then we have thoughts about those feelings, and whatever those thoughts might be, it often enables us to have the next reaction, which is the action phase. And most of the time, we either react in a positive way, a negative way, or an indifferent way. And something happens when we're raised in a lifestyle of trauma, a lifestyle of uncertainty. We develop a sense of fight or flight. In between that thought and action, there's a fight or flight concept there. So many people, when they think about something, if they've been raised in a life of trauma, abandonment, or any kind of social injustices, then they're not very certain about their ability to make the right decisions. So their life is constantly on fight or flight. And when that happens, you don't make the best of choices. And sometimes you ask yourself, well, how come this continues to happen to me? Why am I the one that's always failing? How come life never comes my way? How come I never get what I deserve? I try as hard as everybody else. Why can't I have the rewards? Well, that is part of the maladaptive thought process that I'm talking about. When you look at yourself as a victim based on your surroundings, you could be getting a lot of wonderful things in life, but that victim mentality will always tear down that positive result that life brings your way. And I know that as we're sitting here talking, I know that you probably know some victims, some people that claim to be the victim all the time, that life never fair. They're always waking up with an excuse, always making absolute statements. Nobody, everybody, why can't I? What if I ever? If you know somebody makes those statements, you know, chances are that you mix in a little alcohol, you mix in a little drugs, and you mix in a little criminal activity, you know what happens? A ticking time bomb. And once that time bomb ticks, boom, life is like you don't know it anymore. You start losing people in your life that are important. You start losing people that are loyal to you because something happens with your thought process. You start lying, you start manipulating, you start just losing yourself. And you know when that happens, people tend to walk away from you. Have you ever had that happen, chat? Have you ever known somebody who always played the victim and they were always telling people, well, nobody cares about me, nobody loves me, none of that? They're always playing the victim, always unable to stop making those poor choices. But like I'm talking about these choices a lot more than drugs and alcohol at the moment, that should tell you that, you know what, drugs and alcohol, that is nothing but a symptom of a life gone wrong. It really is. Because people can be sober and still live life unmanageable. They could still be sober and be totally off the rails. You would swear that they were that they had relapsed or they've gone back to their old ways or anything like that, because their lifestyle is exactly as it is when they're using. And all they're waiting for is the eventual falling off the rails, crashing and burning, the self sabotage. And like some of you in chat say, it catches up with you. It really does. Yes, you've known a few. And you ask yourself, was it really their fault? Is it really their fault? Well, I know people like to keep things simple, and I'm going to show a little video right here to show you how trauma affects people when they're growing up. Trauma is a severe killer of hopes, dreams, and desires if you allow it to be. So this is How Childhood Trauma Leads to Addiction by Gabermate. I'm commenting on this with fair use. Everything I say is only for entertainment purposes, and I understand that I do not own the right to this video.
So an addiction is a complex psychological, physiological process, but which manifests in any behavior that a person enjoys, finds relief in, and therefore craves in the short term, but suffers negative consequences in the long term and doesn't give up despite the negative consequences.
And that is the most basic definition of addiction. It's any behavior that a person finds relief, any behavior, and therefore craves in short term, but suffers negative consequences in the long term and doesn't give up despite the negative consequences. There's a difference between abuse and dependency. And as he goes along, I'm sure he'll discuss that. If not, then I surely will.
So craving pleasure, relief in the short term, negative consequences in the long term, inability to give it up. Now, notice I has said nothing about substances. I said any behavior. So it could be related to cocaine, crystal meth, heroin, fentanyl, marijuana, nicotine, alcohol, whatever. Could also be sex, gambling, internet, relationships, shopping, eating, work, extreme sports, working out, pornography, any number of human activities. So I said any behavior.
Of course, think about this a minute. Do you ever go throughout your day and you might have a routine, but a behavior that you do gives you relief from the world? You might be stressing and you say, well, you know what? I need to go drink me a soda. So you go downstairs or wherever, you grab yourself a soda. That stress is overwhelming. You chug that soda, and then all of a sudden, life is okay. Or if you smoke cigarettes, you smoke that cigarette, you smoke that blunt, whatever it might be, it gives you a calming effect. And therefore, you learn to rely on this whenever life becomes unmanageable for you. But what happens is, whenever you're unable, let's say you're at work or you're in the laundromat or whatever, and you're stressed out because something happened, and you can't just spark up the joint, the blunt. You can't just vape that marijuana anywhere you want. But you can smoke that cigarette. But you're out of cigarettes. And then you start what they call jonesing. You start fiending for that relief. So the negative consequences that could happen to this is you start getting bronchitis more often, you start getting sinus infection, you start getting health issues with your lungs, you start getting all these behaviors associated with your substance use, but you continue anyways, no matter what, because those cravings are more intense than the desired result to stop.
Now, The official definition of addiction, according to the American Society for Addiction Medicine, is that this is it's a primary brain disorder. It arises in the brain, largely due to genetic reasons. This is how they see it, and I say that's just not true. The other popular idea about addiction is that it's a choice that somebody makes, that people choose to be addicted, which is what the legal system is based on. Because if people are not choosing, what are we punishing them for? And although I think the medical definition is closer to the truth, I don't see it as it's a genetic disorder, and I don't see it as a primary brain disorder. So let me perhaps show you why, if that's okay. A human being has two fundamental.
You know, that has been taught for a lot of years, that addiction is a choice. Oh, they just don't want to stop. They don't want to quit. They just want to ruin their lives. They want to just hurt people. They just want to manipulate people. They want to do this, that, and the other. No. I've known a lot of drug addicts and alcoholics and criminal-minded people that, you know what, deep down inside, they're very valued individuals in society. For whatever reason, they're just wired different. Whatever society has done to them, or they allowed to happen to them, because everybody has a choice. Something has shaped them into who they become. Whether it be trauma, whether it be sexual assault, whether it be constant abuse, neglect, exploitation, whatever it might be, they have chosen to defend themselves and from the trauma in whatever ways necessary. And when you can't fight your behaviors or your thought patterns alone without feeling like you're gonna crumble, then you know what? You pick it up and it feels like you're finally home. If you've ever drank before, your first time of drinking feels like your eyeballs open up, everything becomes clearer, everything sounds better. It might even change you. It might make you funnier. It might make you feel like you're more outgoing, that you're more sociable, that you have more ambition. But the moment that you stop drinking and the eventual, passing out, and you wake up and you feel a little bad the next day, you're not yourself, because your body is craving not only that behavior, but it's also craving the feeling of the alcohol. Because believe it or not, alcohol is mostly made of sugar. So if you've ever tried to detox off sugar, you know how terrible that detox is. It's not the only thing it's made of, but it's highly made of sugar.
Fundamental needs, apart from the physical needs in infancy, in childhood. One is for attachment. Now, attachment is the closeness and proximity with another human being for the sake of being looked after, or for the sake of looking after the other. Now, human beings, as mammals, and even birds, are creatures of attachment. We have to connect and attach, because otherwise we don't survive. If there's nobody that's motivated to take care of us, to attach to us that way, and we're not motivated to attach to others, we just can't survive. One interesting thing is that the endorphins, which are the body's internal opiate chemicals, which heroin and all the other opiates resemble.
Well, let's pause right there, because the attachment is important with individuals, especially mammals, ourselves, because you get a newborn baby and you put it in a crib. You don't touch it, you don't talk to it, you feed it a little bit, but you just do the very basic to keep it alive. But you don't pick it up, you don't love on it, you don't, do those little things that newborns get used to hearing and stuff. Well, you know what? Before long, that newborn's going to die. Because if we don't have a sense of attachment to anything, we wilter away and we die. No matter how old we are. And sometimes that's what people attach to drugs and alcohol for, because it keeps them from wanting to feel like they're dying. But secretly, They're, they're just having a slow death regardless. So think of the endorphins he's talking about. Have you ever had a bad day? Of course you have. Most people do. Have you ever been stressed out? Of course you have. Many people do. And you get home and you have a significant other there who's caring, loving, understanding. And the moment that they hug you, your endorphins start going. And all of a sudden, that bad day just seems to melt away. That is what attachment does. It helps people keep going. So think of if you're attached to drugs or alcohol, everything in your day is dysfunctional. The only time that you feel attached to anything is when you're putting a needle in your arm, when you're drinking a beer, when you're snorting some cocaine, when you're doing some methamphetamine, when you're doing some pills, whatever. I will do that. Don't you have her number? Didn't she call you? So, whenever we're having those endorphins going off, it does also release an opiate type enzyme in our bodies to calm us down. So think of if you're popping hydrocodones, if you're popping opiates, heroin, well, your body stops creating those things because it thinks we already have enough. Why make more? So whenever you get clean and sober, your body doesn't release those things instantly anymore. And you have to go through life in stress without calming yourself down. It's hell.
They help to facilitate attachment. So if you take infant mice and you knock out their endorphin receptors so they don't have endorphin opiate activity in their brain, they won't cry for help and separate from their mothers, which would mean that they would die in the wild. And which goes back to what happens early in childhood when there's stress and trauma, these endorphin systems don't develop. And then when people do heroin, it feels like a warm, soft hug to them. They feel love and connection for the first time. That's why it's so powerful. But so we have this need for attachment, without which obviously the human infant, who's the most helpless, the most dependent, the least mature of any creature in the universe at birth, cannot survive without the attachment. And that attachment relationship, given that we have the long...
Because you know what? A baby could sit on the train tracks and a train could be coming. The train could be honking the horn. He could be yelling at the baby to get off the tracks. That baby doesn't know to sense danger because it hasn't been taught. That baby is just going to sit there until the inevitable happens. I know that's a terrible example, but it's the truth. It's kind of like what he's talking about. But whenever you learn a coping skill to deal with life, whether it be drugs, whether it be pornography, whether it be overeating, whether it be just being angry in general, whatever it is that you're feeding, whatever behavior it is, you're getting high off of it to deal with the life that you don't like or that you're trying to escape from. You ever know that you ever hear people tell you how happy of a person they are? Well, you know, most of the time if someone's happy, they don't have to tell you. You're able to see it. You're able to feel it. You're going to feel that aura. You're going to feel that overwhelming, oh, that's a happy person. That's a very joyous person, you know? It's like somebody telling you, you know, I've always ran into people that brag about certain things in their lives, you know? And you're wondering to yourself, like, you know, I played sports my whole life, and we always had those guys that would always brag about, you know, what kind of what kind of boyfriend they were, or what kind of, romantic they were, or whatever. And come to find out, they weren't that good because they were bragging about it to keep people off the scent of finding out how bad of a person they really were. You know what I mean? So let's continue on.
Longest period of development of any creature, well into adolescence and beyond. Attachment is not a negotiable need. But we have another need, which is authenticity. Now, authenticity out of the self means being connected to ourselves, just knowing what we feel and being able to act on it. So that means our gut feelings. So let's look at how human beings evolved. For hundreds of thousands of years, and for 100,000 years or so of this species existing on Earth, how did we live? We didn't live in cities and houses and so on. We lived out there in the wild until very recently in human existence. Now, just how long do you survive in the wild if you're not connected to your gut feelings? Not very long. If you start using your intellect instead of your gut feelings, you just don't survive. So that's a powerful survival need as well. So attachment is a survival need. Authenticity is a survival need. But what happens if your authenticity threatens your attachment relationships? For example, as a 2-year-old, you get angry because you didn't get that cookie before dinner. But your parents can't handle anger because they grew up in homes when there was rageaholicism and they're terrified at the very expression of anger. So they give you the message that good little kids don't get angry. The message you receive is not that good little kids don't get angry, but that angry little kids don't get loved because your parents are not.
So how many times have you heard of individuals getting mixed messages when they're children? Do as I say, not as I do. So you grow up with mixed messages. Don't talk to strangers, but in case of an emergency, go seek out somebody to talk to and tell about it. So that's a mixed message in itself, is it not? Don't talk to strangers, but seek out some help if you're ever in trouble. Well, you're going to be seeking out an adult more often than not. You don't know, right? So there's a lot of mixed messages. And, you grow up with all these confusion. And I'm not saying that, making excuses for when you were young, but you know what? A lot of people never grew up. They became grown-ups with, whether it be child, adolescent, young adult mindsets that never grew up. So they look at the world the same way, whatever it was, age, that either they had trauma or they started drinking or drugging and never stopped. Because emotionally, your brain stops growing. It changes. The more you drink, the more you drug, the more you have these behaviors going on. And you get stuck in that mindset. And it's so hard to get out of because people are just telling you all the way around, stop doing that. If you love me, you'd stop doing that. If you cared about me, you'd stop doing that. If. Think about that a minute. If you could do that, you wouldn't do it anyways. Because like I've always said, it's not about having to be high or drunk to be with other people. It's about you having to be high or drunk to be able to be with yourself. How much self-hatred is that?
Now, sullen, they won't look at you, they talk to you in a harsh way, you're not getting loved. Not experiencing love at that moment. No, but you got to stay attached. Guess what you're going to suppress? The authenticity every time. And this is how we lose connection to ourselves and to our gut feelings. So that, strangely enough, that very dynamic, which is essential for human survival in a natural setting, not becomes a threat to our survival in this more modern setting, where to stay authentic is to threaten attachment. And so we give up our authenticity, and then we wonder who the hell we are, and whose life is this, and who's experiencing all this, and this life doesn't, and who am I really? And so that's where the reconnection has to happen. That's where the healing happens, is with that reconnection. But it's because of that conflict, that tragic conflict in childhood between authenticity and attachment that most of us face, that we lose.
Hey, a lot of people grow up not ever knowing who they really are. I can ask you this question right now, and you can tell me a lot of things about yourself. If you've ever been to prison, if you've ever been locked up, if you've ever been, having life not treat you so well, you're going to tell me. You're going to tell me, well, this has happened, that's happened, I've been divorced, I've lost a child, blah, blah, blah. But when I ask you this question, who are you? Many people can't answer that question without going into the negative parts of themselves or the questioning parts of themselves. I ask you, who are you? Not what are you? Not what your job is, not what relation you are in your family, but who are you? What are you made of? What's your authentic self made of? Many people can't answer that question. They can't. They'll tell you about how much money they made. They tell you about, how they're drowning in debt, how they're having this problem, that problem. But many people cannot tell you the beautiful things about who they are from deep within, because most people don't ever get to that point of self-actualization, which is the hierarchy of needs in Maslow's top pyramid. And I push that not to try to brainwash people or anything like that, but I give them that goal to shoot for. To say, look, one day it'll be a beautiful thing if you're able to say, I know who I am. There was a movie called Runaway Bride, I think it was. Julia Roberts. And I only know about this movie because my girlfriend at the time made me sit through that damn thing like 4 or 5 times. So Julia Roberts never knew who she really was. That's why she was always running away. She was good at the short distance, but she sucked at the long distance game. And that's what an alcoholic or a drug addict or a criminal-minded person is. They're great at the sprint. But when it comes to the long game, they peter out. Well, in that movie, the guy asked her, how do you like your eggs? And she asked him, well, how do you like yours? Well, I like mine poached. Well, poached sounds good. I like mine poached too. And at the very end, the guy's asking her, and she says, I like mine scrambled. So she actually understood that she had been people-pleasing her whole life. And that was part of the problem why she could never attach to anybody long-term to get to that next step. Because you got to be your own person. You have to be your own individual. It doesn't matter how much you love somebody. It doesn't matter how much you're down for them or they need you or you need them, vice versa. At one particular point, you got to have an individual mentality, life, loves, just pet peeves, all these things. Because you're an individual. They're an individual. You have 2 different lives and you mesh both lives as one. And that's what usually happens whenever you let drugs or alcohol intervene in a life, in a marriage, in a relationship. You stop dating, you stop being married to your significant other, and you start being attached to that drug, to that alcohol, to that behavior, whatever it might be, pornography, overeating, exercising. And I'm talking about extremes here, okay? Because there's nothing wrong with, eating and exercising, all that. We need it to live. But, when you become excessive about it, then it becomes harmful to you. I hope I'm making sense. If I am, can you put a 1 in the chat, please? I'm not ignoring you guys. I'm just have a lot to say tonight.
Ourselves and lose connection to our gut feelings. Now, this leads to the question of trauma, because it's one thing to recognize that all this originates in childhood pain. It's quite another to transform that pain. And for that, we have to understand what trauma is. So people often think that trauma is what happens to you. So trauma is a divorce when you were small and your parents fighting. Trauma is your mother's depression. Trauma is your father's alcoholism. Trauma is your parents' argumentation. Trauma is physical or sexual abuse or some loss. Those aren't the traumas. Those are traumatic. But the trauma is not what happens to you. The trauma is what happens inside you. And as a result of these traumatic events, what happens inside you.
Do you see that? And I know a lot of people get that confused. They think that trauma is what happens to you. No, trauma is what happens inside you. It's easy to think that, because we talk about trauma so much. Well, they had trauma. They had trauma. Okay. It isn't what happened to you that lingers long after that's gone. It's what happens inside you based on the event that continues to reenact itself inside you.
You get disconnected from your emotions, and you're disconnected from your body, and you have difficulty being in the present moment, and you develop a negative view of your world, and a negative view of yourself, and a defensive view of other people. And these perspectives keep showing up in your life in the present. So in other words, the addiction is not the primary problem. It's an attempt to solve a problem. And then the real question is, how did the problem arise? In other words, this is where my theory is that it's always rooted in childhood trauma, and that the addiction is an attempt to deal with the effects of childhood trauma, which it does temporarily, while it creates even more problems in the long term. And so the issue is not just to recognize what happened 10, 15, 30, however many years ago, but to actually recognize their manifestations in the present moment and to transcend them. And how do you do that? By reconnecting with yourself, by restoring the connection with your body primarily and with your emotions that you lost. And once you do, when you found these things again, then you have what we call recovery. Because what does it mean to recover something? It means to find it again. So what is it that people find when they recover? They find themselves. And the loss of self is the essence of trauma. So the real purpose of addiction treatment, mental health treatment, any kind of healing is reconnection.
Such a beautiful video. So well done. You said, is that like being a chameleon? Well, the actor is the person that you don't know. That's the person who you conform your reality to be. Like, let's say that you work with a lot of smart people that use big words. Well, maybe you're not all that smart. So you emulate their behaviors, which means like you repeat their behaviors, even if you don't know what you're doing, what you're saying. You don't want to be an outcast. You want to be a part of it. So you learn how to fit into that environment. The chameleon is who you really are behind the scenes. Like let's say you're not at work and you're hanging out with people that your work people would never hang out with. But when you're with them, you transform into that group of people where you don't have to act smart, you don't have to act proper, you don't have to do any of this. So that is the chameleon effect. I hope you guys really enjoyed this. I know it's not long. like normal my lives are, but I wanted to get on here at least for a little bit. I just got back from the gym, so still trying to wind down a little bit, and I thought I'd get on here and come on and say hello because I haven't been on. I've been doing the audio stuff for my Spotify podcast. If you've yet to check that out, why don't you go check that out on Spotify? I've uploaded some readings on Israel Keys, Brian Koberger, as well as some of the Idaho 4 stuff. So, to my people that are watching on X, thank you for being here. And to the people that are watching here on YouTube and those of you that are watching on replay, thank you so much for being here, and I appreciate you more than you realize, because without you, there is no 12. I hope y'all have a beautiful night, and I'll see you again soon. Maestro, cue that music.